Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Talking City podcast with myself, Alex James. Today, joined by Chief City writer Simon Bukowski to bask in some FA Cup glory and be the last big team in it. Si, is that right?
No big teams in it. No, no, no. Let's not go down that Michael Richards road. I heard that Neda Manua was very good on ESPN, uh, but I don't know how to listen to ESPN or watch ESPN, so I wouldn't know. But yeah, it's another big weekend of sports, I would say.
Yes, yes. And the FA Cup win against Plymouth obviously puts City into the last eight. In any other season, I think you'd be looking at that quarter-final draw and thinking this is City's to lose, or certainly in any other season of the last eight. This time, perhaps not so much, and the evidence for that was probably there on Saturday, wasn't it, against Plymouth?
Yeah, I think Saturday was kind of a case of the result being the important thing, but also, from a longer term perspective, you would have liked the performance to be there. But, I've seen a bit of sort of like, oh, City have got really easy draws. They've had Plymouth and Leighton Orient, and like, well, Plymouth knocked out Brentford and
Yeah,
Liverpool. And
exactly.
yes, it was a much changed Liverpool team, but City would have drawn Liverpool if Liverpool had beaten Plymouth. So you can only beat what is in front of you. You can beat what is in front of you more comfortably than City did on Saturday. It wasn't great. It wasn't a great performance. I think, there was a load of positivity from the win at Spurs. Um, and then Pep made 11 changes, and that shouldn't necessarily have sucked the positivity out of it, but it kind of reinforced the fact that, yeah, those 11 guys at Spurs on Wednesday were really good. These 11 guys are not in kind of as great a moment, and it showed. And you need the FA Cup games. You need those players to kind of step up and say, "Look, I am ready to play a part in a bigger game." And I don't think many of the players did, which meant that it was a win and a win that gets them into the quarters, and they can look. They should be targeting the FA Cup this season, but it was another performance that kind of underlined the problems that they've had for most of the year.
Yeah, a bit of a microcosm of the season, a little bit, in that the performance wasn't quite there, and when the changes come, the players who weren't playing almost benefited the most from that, didn't they? By not actually playing in that game.
Yeah, yeah. The likes of Marmoush and Savino and Doku all had very good
Yeah,
afternoons
yeah,
by sitting on the bench um, for 90 minutes as it was. And as soon as Haaland came off the bench as well, everyone on the pitch looked a bit better. Foden had really kind of struggled as a false nine,
yeah,
and
yeah.
his season of fits and starts continues. But as soon as Haaland came on, Foden's getting the ball in kind of a bit deeper, and he's able to test the keeper and be a bit more threatening than he had been up to that point. And I doubt the plan was to play Erling Haaland, because if you rest him, you can. But it was a state of the game that, with the game at 1-1 and Plymouth having taken the lead in the first half, that Pep felt Haaland was necessary, which again is a sign of sort of how the afternoon had gone and a sign of how the season had gone. I think Ilkay Gundogan was very quotable the other month when he spoke to us and said they sort of, I think he said something like, we seem to be taking the most difficult option every time this season.
Yeah.
And he tweeted after the game on Saturday that they had made it unnecessarily exciting, um, the game. And that kind of tells you that, yeah, the players realize it wasn't the best performance, and improvements are needed if they're going to get past Bournemouth in the next round, which is Bournemouth away is probably the toughest draw they could have had out of the 8 teams left.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, Bournemouth having a great season, already beaten City,
Yeah.
um, flying, opened up for a lot of teams that FA Cup now, isn't it? The likes of Bournemouth, Brighton,
Yeah. I,
will be thinking,
I mean, before this round, you would have said Bournemouth should be targeting the FA Cup, just as any other team should be. But Bournemouth are one of those teams in contention for Europe, not out of the top four race by any means. They've done tremendously well all season, but especially losing their two strikers in January, they just kind of glossed over that and moved on. Helped to win on Saturday by Wolves' Mateus Cunha being losing his head, shall we say, and putting his head in the face of someone else. But yeah, like Bournemouth and Brighton uh, should be looking um, for FA Cup success, and they will feel like they've got a real chance. And Bournemouth will certainly not fear City one bit because they've played them at their ground this season and they've beaten them comfortably. So I'd expect it to be a better City team that plays there. Um, but yeah, I think if you were City trying to avoid teams in that draw, Bournemouth away was the
Yeah,
one that
towards the
you,
top of the list.
yeah,
Yeah. As you say, it probably will be a much changed team from that team that we saw against Plymouth because of the team that we saw against Plymouth. But there were a couple of positives to pluck out in terms of individual performances and in the great scheme of the City rebuild that we seem to be talking about almost
yes,
daily.
yeah.
That continually needs rebuilding. We've uncovered Nico O'Reilly and Vitor Heish, if I've got my
Yes, I think so. Yeah,
pronunciation
yeah,
correct there.
yeah. All those days on Copacabana Beach have served you well. Yeah, they were good. It was kind of the Spurs game was like, oh, we've got the future of the club, and this was two more examples where you're like, actually, for all more work is needed in the summer transfer window, but there are a lot of talented young players at City, and the fan base has gone slightly mad over Kusanov about how
Yeah,
great he's been, and
he
he,
seems to have arrived as almost an instant cult hero after
yeah,
minus the first 5 minutes.
well,
Sort
yeah.
of,
Well, I think the first 5 minutes have kind of made him this
yeah,
cult
perhaps,
hero,
yeah,
but he's so good. He was rested completely from Saturday's game. It's normally you would expect it to be a game that he would play in, and he played half in the last
yeah,
round. But he was rested completely. He's now the best defender, and like with Nathan Ake pulling up injured and likely to be out again with Stones and Akanji, that means that even more chances for Kusanov coming. But Vitor Reis played the full game and looked very good, looked very composed. Um, he's got kind of an elegance about him. He's not the most physical, but he puts himself about and he's pretty nice to watch on the ball. Um, and you can see in the first few performances that he's made, he's only played a game and a half of football, but you can already see why City have signed him and
yeah,
why he looks like a player that City would sign. And I think Hugo Viana had a lot to do with his signing. So again, that kind of points to the future. And then Nico O'Reilly, who looks nothing like a City Academy player, said Pep. He's tall and big and physical and lanky almost, and he's got a physical presence that very few players in the academy have. He's a midfielder, he's an attacking midfielder, but he's kind of been pushed into defensive roles and played left back again, where he hasn't always looked comfortable, but has at times. He's now got 3 FA Cup goals
yeah,
after two on Saturday. 2 headers, took them both really well. And he looks a talent wherever he ends up on the pitch. He looks a talent, and I still don't think people are convinced that left back is his position. Um, and I'm not convinced that left back is his position, but you look at it and you look at the way that Pep has used other attacking midfielders as
yeah.
left backs.
Well, he doesn't like left backs, does he?
No, but and it's kind of like, well, if O'Reilly is playing like that, why can't he be used to kind of give Guardiola rest and things like that? And why can't we start to see him more in the Premier League and things like that?
Yeah, and obviously a threat from set as Heish was as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Another dimension for City there to have, as you say, tall, attacking,
yeah,
strong players from set pieces. And I think also when you do sign a Heish and you sign a Kusanov and you spend 50, 60 million on what are they, 19 and 20, something like that,
yeah,
you do think, oh, the path is blocked there for all these players that we always talk about in dominant City under
yeah,
21 teams.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's heartening, I think, to see an O'Reilly come in,
yeah,
and as Rico Lewis has done before him, as maybe a couple of others will, in the summer on the Club World Cup, perhaps, or moving into next season. There's certainly a lot of talent in that City academy, but it's nice to see someone make the platform and it not be us sitting here thinking, "Oh, Taylor Howard-Bellis has got an England cap. He could
Yeah,
have,
yeah.
he could have had a really good season for City this season, in theory, in an alternative dimension."
Yeah, yeah, and I think what people who've watched O'Reilly for a while have been sort of slightly frustrated at is that like he's a physical presence and he's got legs and he's got energy and he's a midfielder. And City have lacked legs and
Yeah,
energy and a physical presence in midfield. And it's like, why not give this kid a go? But all his opportunities have come at left back, really. But it is a way into the team, and he showed again. I would say he's probably taken most of his opportunities this season. He hasn't been perfect every game. I don't think he was great at Leighton Orient, for example, but like against Salford, he was one of the best players. On Saturday against Plymouth, he was one of the best players, and that is no like easy feat because it's League One opposition, Championship opposition. Like they are good teams, and it's a good level and standard of football. And he stood out as one of the best players on the pitch, and in the he stood out as one of the best players on the pitch in a City team containing De Bruyne,
yeah,
Gundogan,
10 other
Silva,
internationals. Yeah,
like players who are much more experienced than him and have done much more things. So very promising. And yeah, he looks like he's got the talent to make it. It's just finding the right position for him and also keeping him happy because, Chelsea inquired about him in January and that interest has been around for a while and will not go away, I don't think. And other clubs will be interested the more he plays.
yeah, he's one who perhaps similar to James McAtee, I guess. He's a couple of years younger than James McAtee, isn't he? And he's got a lot of senior football under his belt than James McAtee. So perhaps he's less of a position where somebody's going to go and sign him and put him straight into a team, which is what would happen with McAtee. But
Yeah.
he doesn't want to look at McAtee and think, really want to be on the bench every week for the next 2 seasons. I want to play my football
Yeah.
without getting too far ahead of himself. He's got to have that in the back of his mind, and perhaps he's one who can benefit from the Club World Cup, and he can perhaps benefit from the next few months as well, where City are trying to find their feet. There's vacancies in the team a little bit. There's no midweek games hardly at all now. There's full weeks on the training pitch. There's the opportunity is there over the next 3, 4, 5 months to stake a claim probably.
I think so. And if you speak to people around the players, what I found quite interesting the last few months is that there's a bit of uncertainty there. I could make a Chargers joke, but I won't. It's definitely not to do with the Chargers, but it's more the fact that there's a new sporting director coming in, and nobody knows for certain quite which way he will go. Everyone has dealt with cheeky Begirissim for 12 years or however long the players have been at the club,
Yeah.
and they know exactly how cheeky works and they know exactly how he thinks and they know how Pep thinks, and the two of them are in sync. Now, Viana has been picked to bring this kind of smooth transition, but he is his own guy and he's already had an influence on signings. And the players who are in the squad currently are thinking, I don't know 100% that I am in this guy's plans for going forward. And all this talk of a rebuild, we're going to make more signings in the summer. Like, I need to nail down my place and make sure I'm essential to this City future. Because there will be changes. And in those changes, people like O'Reilly can maybe sort of prosper.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think it's going to be a really interesting summer. Obviously, City have spent big in January for the first time in forever, and still look like they need certainly a right back, probably a goalkeeper, maybe a couple of other positions as well, in terms of first team ready players as well, which you can argue Kushnov and
Yeah.
Aish are not. Um, and yet we've got a situation where we've got Kevin De Bruyne, one of City's best ever, certainly one of the most influential players of the last however long Kevin De Bruyne has been at City, decade.
Yeah.
Is he going to be at City next season? We've got Gundogan, treble winning captain, huge performances that year. Is he going to be at City next season? Probably by default, without meaning to sound disrespectful to somebody who's triggered a contract by playing X amount of games for Manchester
Yeah.
City. But
Yeah. I don't know if they will. And I know Pep said on Friday that there is a place for these players and it's not like they're all going to be thrown out. But I felt like it was another example on Saturday where Gundogan and De Bruyne and Silva didn't show enough to suggest they can,
Yeah, have the same
you know,
influence as perhaps they have. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and and they might want to stay on in kind of uh, roles where they don't play as much, or they might feel like this season has just been a perfect storm and everything's gone wrong, and they can rediscover their best form and fitness. I'm sure Gundogan would love a run of games where he's nowhere
Y-
near the number six position,
yeah,
for
yeah.
instance. But I think that the jury remains out, and as long as kind of the younger players are performing better than them, there kind of have to be questions.
Yeah,
You know,
and
I
yeah,
don't
exactly.
know a City fan that would want see the end of Kevin De Bruyne, but if you're talking about the best squad for next season, and same with like Nathan Ake and John Stones, everyone loves them, but no one loves them when they miss chunks of the season through injury. And if they can't stay fit and if they can't find the best form, then you have to move on and find the Kusanovs of the world and move on.
And the longer there's this silence around De Bruyne as well. In any other situation, you would
Yeah.
be thinking, well, he won't be here next season because it's dragged on for so long and nothing's been said. And it's always when I'm fit and in form. And those two things perhaps haven't correlated as yet.
Yeah.
If that doesn't come between now and May, he's not going to turn up in May and think, what should we do now, Pep? These discussions will be ongoing, they'll be had, and no one's naive enough to think that they won't be. But
Yeah.
the longer that sort of nothing happens, the more likely it is that if he does stay, he certainly will be I would have thought, in a reduced role. He might well want to stay with one eye on a World Cup as well. I think that would potentially be a factor for.
And the thing is that if he stays on in a reduced role, he has to stay on significantly reduced money. Like the last time Kevin De Bruyne renewed his contract at Manchester City, he employed a report from an analytics company that basically said, this is what the cost would be to replace Kevin De Bruyne. These are the players that could replace Kevin De Bruyne that would be of a similar sort of metric and a similar influence. These are the players that could do it. And that list was blank because nobody could do what Kevin De Bruyne could. And nobody has been able to do what De Bruyne has been able to do over the last 10 years. But right then, he was at the peak of his powers
Yeah,
and he could
yeah,
say, I am having this much money because this is what I'm worth and this is what you will lose if you don't have me. If the same company was to compile the same report now, I think there would be more players on the list, and I think there would be kind of De Bruyne is far less essential to City now than he was because his availability and his form have deteriorated.
yeah. And this is coming after a game where he scored and set the other
Assisted.
two up,
Yeah.
albeit with two dead balls. But
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it feels like it felt on Saturday like he didn't kind of run the game as he previously would have done. And the
yeah,
same goes for Gundogan. Um, and De Bruyne is still over the past kind of 2 years, he's kind of become a player more reliant on moments, and he had the moments because he got the important bits. But I wouldn't say it was like a terrific performance from him on Saturday. He played okay and he got the goal and assist kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. He definitely didn't stamp his authority on a game in where, as you say, 2-3 years ago. Well, 2-3 years ago, he probably wouldn't have played in that game, let alone stamp his
Yeah.
authority on it. That
Well,
that
that's
says as
it.
much as anything, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, that is very telling. And it's one of those things where everyone's been waiting for sort of
Yeah, the
the
renaissance or the
real De
second
Bruyne
coming,
to
or
return,
yeah,
and it's not quite happening. And the same goes for much younger players in the squad. The same goes for Foden. The same goes for Grealish. Um, uh, that that has been the story of City's season. Too many players have not performed to the best of their abilities, but you'll be more confident in a Foden turning it round than you would De Bruyne because he's not got the same miles in his legs.
yeah, yeah. You're right. We've spent 5-10 minutes talking about De Bruyne, then, which could equally apply to 5-6 other City players in that squad on the evidence of this season.
Yeah, yeah, but I think De Bruyne is the one, right? Because he's out of contract, and when he leaves City, it will be a huge thing. Because because he's been, arguably the greatest ever player seen at the football club. So, and his sacrifice for the treble will always be remembered by fans and by staff. But there has to be an end point, and at the minute, I don't think the player could argue if City decided that the end point would be this summer. But he's still got 2-3 months left to
Yeah,
to change that
change.
narrative. Yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly the phrase I was just going to use. We're
Oh,
almost finishing each other's sentences. That's the kind of relationship we've got here. That's
yeah.
right. On that note, that's it for part one. Stay with us, and we'll be back after a short break. Welcome back to part two of the Talking City podcast with myself, Alex James, and Simon Bukowski, Chief City Writer. We're just going to sort of look ahead now to, I guess, the structure of the season will be what it is to come this week, which is not much until the weekend. Sitting enviously on watching the Champions League games in midweek, which obviously City are not going to be in, but teams that have beaten City, Real Madrid, PSG, even Club Brugge are still in.
Bruges. Wow.
Still going strong. But it is time to sort of recoup, recharge, perhaps get a little bit of fitness back into some players, although that seems to be another ending cycle of injury, return, injury, return, with Nathan Ake being the latest to go off. And then obviously a big game on Saturday at Forest.
Yeah. I think it's going to be really interesting these next few months. Kind of as we touched on in the first part, like as much as the summer is going to be big for a rebuild, like we're at the point where Pep knows he's staying
Yeah.
and he knows he is leading this rebuild and he knows they're basically qualified for top 5, top 4. I think a win over Forest, no easy task, would confirm it, but like there's plenty of games left. After Forest, I don't think City really play anyone.
I think Brighton.
They've got Brighton at home.
I think it might be the only other top sort of 8,
Yeah.
9 team, perhaps.
Yeah, they've got Villa at home, but they've not really got a test that you would think. I'm not sure this City team would be comfortable. So they should easily walk top 4. So within that, Pep has got scope to experiment and work out how his team are going to sort of blow everyone away next season, or try to blow everyone away. Because this is what they found themselves in 2016-17, Pep's first season in English football, when he knew a massive rebuild was coming in summer and loads of players would leave and a lot would arrive. But they kind of got themselves into this position where they were still in the FA Cup, I think, but out of every other competition. And they said, right, well, we're going to use this time and we're going to use these long weeks on the training ground to sort of build a bit of form and confidence and style and work out what exactly needs to be done to get this team to where they need to be, and to get this team to a point where it just needs the addition of a few players in summer to really complete the transformation rather than start it.
Yeah.
And it's things they're not used to either, because they're not used to having such long weeks, but they've got the time. They've got the time to work out exactly where everything has gone wrong, what needs to be changed, who needs to be changed. And Pep needs to look at himself as well, and will look at himself, because as he's made clear this season, like the way City are playing is not necessarily modern football. There are a lot of teams like Bournemouth, Liverpool, Villa, teams like that who are playing a different kind of football that is more effective at the minute and very effective against City. I don't think Guardiola will kind of stray away from that, but he still needs to find a way of making his version better than everyone else's. So that's going to be interesting. And yeah, a lot of it will be done behind closed doors on the training ground, but hopefully over the next 12 weeks or so, City can work themselves into a position where we are talking about them heading to the Club World Cup as a team that could win it.
Yeah.
Because that is what they want to do. And as disappointing a season as it's had, um, if they get people back and if they get players working in better sort of moments and discovering their form more, there is no reason City can't win the Club World Cup and the FA Cup and finish fourth and sort of make the best of a bad season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we forget some the Club World Cup, well derided maybe here, or certainly looked down upon a little bit, and certainly
Yeah,
the expanded version is definitely looked down upon by a lot of football fans in this country. Certainly of those teams who aren't in it. But in South America, it is a massive deal, and in the States, with the World Cup coming there next year, it'll be a huge deal. It'll be, I know it's straying away from football, but it'll be huge for City as a club and as a brand to put
yeah.
on a show in that tournament as well.
Oh, yeah, and Pep has always wanted to be there. Like, I think part of the difficulty around him maybe leaving or staying at the end of this season when his contract was up was that if
Yeah,
he
over the
was
line.
going to leave, he absolutely wanted to do the Club World Cup, but you can't say, okay, new manager, you come in after the Club World Cup because this guy wants to do the Club World Cup
Yeah.
before he leaves.
And in 2 weeks, we're
By the
starting
way,
the
the season
season.
started
Yeah.
and none of the players are fit. Good luck. Pep absolutely wants to be there, and I know it's kind of been derided a bit more for being a bigger tournament, but
Yeah.
a bigger tournament means that it's harder to win, and City may well have to beat Real Madrid to win the Club World Cup, and that would never have been the case. Well, I suppose it technically was, but in the smaller version, there was only one European team,
Yeah, yeah.
so they were already there. They were big favourites to win. You only have to win 2 games, whereas now it's going to be 7 games, 3 group games, and then 4 knockouts. And I think the maybe a few concerns around the competitiveness of the competition are that it will just end up as kind of like another Champions League knockouts because the European teams will be the strongest
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they will play each other. But that means it's difficult, right? So um, it's going to be tough for City to win it, and they will have to be close to their best, and so they need to get themselves into a position. But it would be huge, kind of. It would send a message out, wouldn't it? If City win the Club
100%.
World Cup,
Especially if you knock out
yeah,
even it doesn't have to be Real Madrid. Somebody else might knock Real Madrid out,
yeah,
but
yeah,
even if it's a whoever, an Inter Milan or whoever it is that
yeah,
City would have not beaten
yeah,
this season. I mean, they didn't beat Inter, and they
precisely,
lost
yeah.
to several other teams who you would say are perhaps not as good as Inter.
Yeah, like if City can have a successful end to this season, I remember the 16-17 season they won the last 4 or 6 games and they beat Watford 5-0 on the last day away from home, and it was like, yeah, this team can go places. And if they can have that kind of end and then bring Rodri back and have a really successful Club World Cup, then come the start of the season, in like a few weeks after that final, you'll be saying, yeah, City look back. They've got new players and their old players look better.
Yeah, and it's the
Um,
classic. Let's say Liverpool are going to win the league. Can Liverpool go again?
yeah,
United and Spurs are nowhere. Arsenal have gone close, but the best opportunity is probably this season, and they're nowhere near
yeah,
winning the title. All those questions around everybody else
yeah,
return, and
yeah,
City,
yeah,
like you say, win the last 6 games of the season, finish third, win the FA Cup final, win the Club World Cup, and oh yeah, yeah, City will win next season's Premier League easy. It'll be back to how we thought 2 or 3 summers
yeah.
ago.
I mean, Pep brought it up after the Plymouth win, where he was sort of asked if FA Cup win would make the season a success, and he was like, no. And I'm glad he said it because if we were to say it, we'd get battered
Yeah.
for being negative.
Well, it
But
wouldn't make it a success, but it would make it it would certainly give them more of an increased chance of success moving forward if they had a platform A with silverware and B with
yeah.
momentum,
Well,
I would say.
I think the question for City, or the the way the City story is framed at the minute, is like the future is coming, this rebuild is coming. How much of the current squad is still gonna be coming along with it? Because there's been a lot of talk this season, like end of an era, and it's like, well, it might be an end of an era for a player or a few players, but can you talk about it as an end of an era if City win the FA Cup, finish top four, win the Club World Cup, and are then sort of banging the Premier League title race. I don't think you can. And I think we've seen it, a number of times. City didn't win the league in 2020, and they were well off it then. And some people thought, and they started the next season horrendously, and yeah, I think they were eighth, ninth around Christmas time, and you think, well, is this the end of the era? And no, they won four straight Premier League titles. So there's a lot of promise still in the City squad led by Guardiola, and the rest of the season is about kind of showing as much as they can that they already have most of the squad to compete and win trophies and titles, which they can do with two more pieces of silverware this season.
And it's hard to see Pep throw in everything that Pep's done in terms of possession-based football and all of that sort of stuff. Whatever this rebuild, however this rebuild looks, that's still going to be surely that's still going to be the basis of City. They're not going to suddenly rip up the rule book and turn into I don't know
No,
rock and roll football or
they're not going to be
become a counter-attacking team
Simeone's
or yeah,
Atletico.
exactly.
Yeah,
It's about solving the problem that they have on transition, and that, as you said before, Bournemouth and Villa and countless other teams this season
yeah.
have exposed that.
It,
But that doesn't mean City need to start playing like Bournemouth and Villa.
no, no, and I don't think you will ever get that. And I think Pep will say like, no, this is my style. If you want a different style, absolutely fine. And I think post Pep, I don't think there's anything wrong with moving on to a slightly different style. I think if you were looking now, like Andoni Iraola would be well up there as a potential next manager to take the team and the squad on. But as long as Pep is there, they're going to play his kind of football, and it's not like completely. Pep has changed with the times and he's adapted. He's not like some guy who just has this one set
Yeah, yeah,
4-4-2 and we will not deviate from it. And he has adapted, but the fundamentals are the same, and it's about possession and patience and control. And I think it's easy to forget when he arrived in England in 2016, possession football was absolutely not the norm. Like Portugal had just won the Euros. The whole Euros have been every team being like, we don't want the ball because we want to counter. No, we don't want the ball. Like Leicester had just won the Premier League. Um, and he changed all that. Everyone playing out from the back and possession football was because his City team had so much success. And now other teams have kind of had success, their own success or the success in their terms by playing a different kind of football. And that is probably prevailing at the moment. But that doesn't mean that City can't come again and say, yeah, well, our style is going to win all the trophies again.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And just before we head off, just a quick look at Forest and sort of the next what was it next two? Is there two more games for the international break? There is, isn't there? And then the
Yes.
FA Cup after that. So
Yeah.
Forest and Brighton, you would, as you said before, you would think 6 points in those games and top four is 95+%. But
Yes.
these are the kind of games where City have certainly away from home at Forest, no easy task. Brighton are coming into a bit of form as well and look like the kind of team who would cause this City side problems at the Etihad. They are two difficult games, but two winnable games.
Yeah, I think Forest is the more difficult one. The trip last year towards the end of the season was horrid. City were lucky to come out of that alive, and at a time when defeat would have, put the title race back in
Yeah.
Arsenal's hands. So and then the Forest win in December is really like weirdly like the aberration from that run because City were dreadful in
Yeah.
every game, but then beat Forest 3-0. And
Quite
everyone
comfortably as
at the
well. Well,
time, I think City moved above Forest into fifth or moved clear fifth of sixth, and everyone thought, well, Forest's race is run. And absolutely not. Forest are now flying again and in third. I think City would absolutely take a point on Saturday, but if they were able to get the win, it would be enormous. And then Brighton at home is a game a bit like Newcastle at home, where you kind of expecting a good team to turn up, and if a good team turns up, they can cause you problems. But you're also buoyed by performances like the Newcastle game and the win at Spurs. You're thinking, yeah, actually, we can win these kind of games
Yeah, yeah.
against decent teams. So like 6 points would, yeah, nail down Champions League qualification, but I think City would take 4.
Could City catch Arsenal?
They can catch Arsenal, yeah, and I think that has to be the aim still in the Premier League. I think they have to push for second, but you can't push for second if you're losing away at Nottingham Forest or you're not beating Brighton at home. So those are kind of the more immediate, one game at a time, uh, really boring stuff, but like has to be that way. But if City can come with 6 points from these two games, I think they can say, yeah, let's catch Arsenal.
That would be that. Would it be ironic? Would it be funny? Would it be a bit of?
Humbling.
Would it be a bit of? Yeah. Would it be a bit of both to end the season? And I know there's a lot of ifs involved in this
Yeah,
conversation, but
yeah,
to end the
yeah,
season with a trophy when Arsenal quite conceivably could not. They've got Champions League or nothing
yeah.
really in
Well, I
terms of.
mean, already Community Shield winners City, so
Oh yeah,
they could
sorry, I
yet
forgot
win.
about that.
They could yet end with 3 trophies, which will be
That's right. The
um,
often forgotten treble of.
Community Shield, Club World Cup, and FA Cup. Were they part of? No, I don't think they were part of City's 5 because City didn't win the Community Shield. But Liverpool will win the league and are likely to win the Carabao Cup, and are in the Champions League, so could win 3 trophies, but may not win three
They won't be.
trophies.
Yeah, they won't be
City.
parading the Community Shield around Anfield in May.
So, I mean, the other thing is if City were to win the FA Cup, it would get them an invite into the Community Shield, which they probably don't want because it's a week after the Club
Oh
World
yeah,
Cup
yeah.
final. But well, they can deal with that when they come to it.
Cross those bridges down the line.
Yeah, the price
Great.
of success.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And I think that rounds it off nicely for this edition of the Talking City podcast. As ever, you can follow all our content online and on our various social media platforms. Do keep subscribing and listening to the podcast, and we'll be back with Simon and Joe Bray on Friday. Thanks very much for listening.